Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Zoom Room A for the Data Collection and Enumeration session, Part 1. I'm Dr. Shelby McDonald, and I am the Director of Research in the Department of Strategy and Research at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Prior to joining the ASPCA, I was a tenured associate professor in the School of Social Work at Virginia Commonwealth University, where I still serve as a core faculty member at the Clark Hill Institute for Positive Youth Development, which is a CDC-funded Center for Violence Prevention. And I am pleased to be your moderator for this session. The research landscape of homelessness and animal companionship has been mostly qualitative to date, which is why today's session is very exciting. Today we have two researchers with us who will be presenting on their work, and their work adds new dimensions to our understanding of people experiencing homelessness with their companion animals. Dr. Jaume Ríos from the Autonomous University of Barcelona and Dr. Benjamin Henwood from the University of Southern California will be our speakers today. So speaking first is Dr. Jaume Ríos, who is joining us from Barcelona, Spain. He has a degree in veterinary medicine and a PhD from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And he is a diplomat of the European College of Animal Welfare and Behavioral Medicine. And since 2010, he has been an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Forensic Medicine at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And in 2012, he became the director of the Chair Affinity Foundation Animals and Health at the Department of Psychiatry and Forensic Medicine at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And he is also the co-founder of Ethometrix. His research interests are focused on understanding the relationships between people and animals, the development of tools to assess canine and feline behavior, as well as the comparative study of human psychiatric disorders and problems of animal behavior. So thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Fatjó Ríos. Please begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you very much for your for this kind introduction. Let me share my screen just to share with you my presentation, my slides. Okay, can you see my slides correctly? Okay, perfect. So, as I was saying, thank you very much for your introduction. I would like to thank the organization for giving me the opportunity to share with you this study that we just conducted in Barcelona some months ago. And before I start, I would like to thank my colleagues in this project. Noe Terrassa, she's from the FADA Foundation, which is the organization that has been actually moving this project forward in Barcelona, and also to Professor Jonathan Bowen at the University of London at the Royal Veterinary College. So as you were saying already, I'm going to present a preliminary data on a study that we just conducted in Barcelona to explore the role of domestic dogs as a source of social support for people experiencing homelessness. And well, basically, I will divide my talk into basically 4 sections, or I will focus on 4 ideas: why we conducted the study, the reason for that, how we did it, then we will discuss a little bit of the methodology. Then I will jump into the results, which is obviously the most important part of it, and what are the implications of the results for us. And then I will try to summarize some conclusions. Well, just to give you an idea of the situation that we have here, Barcelona is a city. You know, Barcelona is around. It's not as big as New York. It's about, I would say, a little bit under 2 million people. All the metropolitan area will be around 3 million people. And we have, this is the last figure that we have. This is from 2021, according to the Arrels Foundation and also the city authorities. The estimation is that we have around 1,000 people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Barcelona. Well, among them, the estimation that both Arrels Foundation and Father Foundation have is that 80 of them, they live at least with one dog. So this is actually the starting point. And as you all know, and this is something that has been already, covered in the literature. If you think about the barriers to shelter access, and you think about the psychological barriers and the structural barriers, you know that having a no pet policy is one of the main structural barriers to shelter access all over the world. And then what we were asking ourselves, why is this so? I mean, why is so common to have these, and that was mentioned before the session when they were when they were presenting that very nice video before the session. And what is this so common if we all agree, we should all agree that dogs are considered by most people members of the family and a very important source of social support. And this is something that we have already explored in our previous studies. And this is just to give you an example. This is a study that we published last year in 2021, actually trying to quantify the value of companion dogs as a source of social support. In this study, we were not trying to prove that dogs are actually a very important source of social support. We were trying to quantify the prevalence of this value, of this social support that people perceive, or that people get from their dogs. And we were able to access a representative sample of Spanish people living with dogs. And we were using, I will say, a standard tool a standard psychometric tool that we have used before, called the MDOS, which is basically a way to analyze in a very structured way the human-animal bond and the different dimensions of the human-animal bond. And from this tool, you can derive many of the aspects that actually constitute what we call social support. And just long story short, basically what we found is what you have here summarized in this slide, that, well, when you consider, people just living with dogs, the general population, most people think that their dogs actually help them to get through tough times. That's very common. They get comfort from physical contact with their dogs. They share lots of activities with their dogs, that they actually approach their dogs as a confidant. And actually, what is very interesting is that people, a vast majority of people, and we have explored that in many different countries, they go to their dogs when they face difficult times, and actually they share with their dogs, or they tell their dogs things that they don't tell anyone else. And you are probably very familiar with that yourselves. They see their dogs as opportunities to express caregiving behavior, which is very important if you think about something like self-esteem. And among all these dimensions of social support, we will say that one of the main features of dogs for people as sources of social support is that they are always available. This is one of the main characteristics that people value about the relationship that they have with their dogs. And well, this is an open access journal. So if you want more information on this particular research, well, you can access the paper, and I will be more than happy to send you the paper, the full paper. So basically, what we were able to do is to quantify this social support that people were getting from their dogs, but also we were able to explore the different dimensions of social support, these 5 dimensions of social support that I already mentioned. So basically, this is in accordance, or this could, we could conclude from here that dogs could be considered an example of what people working on, people exploring or studying the structure of the human family, they call a fictive kinship. So these are not our words, but this is what has been suggested by the literature. And actually, dogs are they fit very well within this, let's say, category of fictive kinship, because a fictive kinship accounts for non-traditional family ties based on neither consanguineal or marital relationship. So this is a very, I would say, functional approach to understand what do you consider a family member, as opposed to more traditional ways of thinking about family ties, which are more based on cultural tradition and even your religious background. So that was this is a piece of evidence that we already had. So dogs are considered, they are very important sources of social support, as I already said. So then, however, and this is probably our hypothesis here, is that the human-animal bond, at least by some people or at least by some institutions, is not fully recognized. And this is probably the underlying reason behind this resistance, I would say, from some institutions to allow the access of pets to certain facilities, certain premises. So those were the two hypotheses of our study. We were trying to prove the value of dogs as sources of social support for people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the city of Barcelona. And also we wanted to characterize the relationship between homelessness, between people experiencing homelessness and their dogs, as an example of a non-traditional family structure or a non-traditional family tie. Okay, how we did it? Well, this is the core of the study was FADA Foundation. They actually work in the area of Barcelona. They have a very nice project, which is called Best Friends, well, Millors Amics, that's in Catalan, Best Friends. And that is the program aimed to provide support to people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the area of basically in the area of Barcelona. And the way that people access our colleagues from FADA is they have three ways to access or to get this support. They contact them directly, or they are referred to them by social services, or they are just referred to them by neighbors. And the point of the whole project is actually to support that particular or that important bond that is established between people experiencing homelessness and their dogs. So if you remember, I said that we have 80 people in this situation, experiencing this situation in Barcelona. And well, I have to say that my colleagues from the FADA Foundation did a very good job, because they were the ones running the face-to-face interviews. They were the ones doing the field work, and they were able to get interviews from 30 out of the 80 people that I mentioned before. That means almost 40%, for a sample of a 40% sample of that particular population, which is very good, I think. And basically, in these interviews, just a long story short again, we were basically trying to get information on the value of dogs, not just dogs, on who was providing social support to the participants of the study, to these people experiencing homelessness. And also we included other measures of life satisfaction and life stress. But for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to focus my attention on those measures that I already talked about of social support. And basically, we used a combination of different methodologies. For instance, we included in the interview a modified version of a scale that is called the HUTU scale, which basically asks you, well, think about a situation where you will need some help from someone, like, and you can see the list here. Which individuals do you value most for advice? Which individuals do you like to share your time with? Which individuals do you not like to be away from? So it's a psychometric tool that basically gets information from you on all the individuals, and and I'm saying individuals because we didn't restrict actually the list to human relationships. We said to the person, just name any individual around you that could fulfill each of these dimensions of social support. So basically, this is these are the main features of the methodology that we used, and this is actually take us to the results. And the first result that I would like to mention to you is that the average depth of, we call it this way, the average depth of the social network of these participants, of this population, is 1.4 individuals, including their dogs. So this means that on average, this group of 30 people, they have less than 2 individuals to approach or to get social support from in times of difficulty. And one of them, and I said that is including the dog. So that means that they have very compromised social networks. So they are in a situation, in a very, very difficult situation in terms of who they have around them to provide some social support. I forgot to mention, but you already know that social support is one of the main predictors of good physical health and psychological well-being. Well, now if we go into the details, if you now try to estimate what is the most commonly reported source of social support, as you can see here, dogs were the one were ranked first. So 33% of all mentions of all the individuals mentioned by participants were actually dogs, followed by friends, then followed by professionals. And in this category of professionals, we include social workers, actually, or colleagues from FADA, and family. As you can see, family was next, so it's in the 4th position. Then partners, and then the neighbors. So as we can see here, the traditional family is not very available for these people as a source of social support. We are not saying that they are not there, but when these people are asked, well, who do you go to, or name the people or the individuals that you can count on in times of difficulties, or when you need to do something, or when you feel well, they don't put family members in the first place. And actually, dogs are as I said, the ones ranked first. Actually, 74% of participants ranked dogs as the first or the main source of support for them, which is, we were amazed about the result. And in this table, you have the results split by every single dimension of social support, of this idea of social support that I mentioned before. And as you can see here, it makes a lot of sense, because it says, well, who provides you with more companionship? Well, dog goes first. It's 97% of people say, well, dog is the first one. Then if you go to the bottom of the table, when you say, well, who do you value the most for advice? Obviously they say, well, yes, much as I like the relationship with my dog, when I need some help, when I need financial help, or when I need advice, I have to go to somewhere else. And then dogs are ranked first only by 10% of participants. And in a way, that makes a lot of sense, but also it tells us that dogs are very important for these people, but they are not enough. So these people experiencing homelessness, at least the population that we screened in Barcelona, they need other sources of social support to go through particularly difficult times. But overall speaking, I will say that our results actually suggest that people are extremely satisfied about the relationship that they have with their dogs. So they are getting a lot from their dogs. They have also invested a lot in this relationship, they put a lot of effort to keep that relationship going. But also, we also saw that there are not many alternatives for them other than the one that they have with their dogs. And now, if you think about one theory, which is very interesting to understand how committed we are to one particular relationship, which is what is called the Roosevelt investment model, to understand relationships in general, you could say that you are very committed to a relationship. If you are not familiar with the model, you say, I am very committed to one particular relationship if I am very satisfied about this relationship, if I have invested a lot in that particular relationship, and I have no clear alternatives. So if we follow this model, what we can see is that participants in our study will actually show a very high degree of commitment to that particular relationship. They are not going to renounce to that particular bond. And that means that they will not trade off that particular relationship for gaining something like shelter access. And this is why for us is so critical that we provide shelter access, that we don't have a no pet shelter policy, because we cannot expect from people living with dogs in the street to trade off that relationship in order to gain shelter access, not even for a relatively brief period of time. So what are the conclusions of this initial project that we have conducted in Barcelona? Well, the first one, we already discussed it, is that companion animals are an essential source of social support for people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And now we are trying to expand the study to include more people, to get more information from the same population, but also from other people experiencing homelessness or sheltered homelessness in the area of Barcelona. Then we can see that from a functional perspective, dogs can actually, indeed, they can be considered fundamental members of the family of people experiencing homelessness. Well, that means that the bond between people experiencing homelessness and their dogs must be safeguarded at all times. Otherwise, a fundamental element of their already very compromised social network would be lost. Then that means that from a strategic perspective, public policies should take into account the protection of the human-animal bond between people experiencing homelessness and their pets. And this is something that we are trying to work on since we started with the project, with all projects on the human-animal bond, is that if we put value, if we demonstrate the value of the human-animal bond, not just for them, but for people in general, then everything becomes easier. Because if you prove that that is something that has to be safeguarded, then it's easier to persuade people to come up with good public policies to protect it. And then as the last conclusion, we will say that we believe that companion animals as a source of fictive kinship should be included within the definition of family relationships, which is something that we are working towards with the Spanish authorities and actually working together with the Father Foundation. So this is a summary of the study that we conducted. I think that I didn't run out of time. Well, if you have questions or comments, I think that we have a session of a Q&A session later, so I will be more than happy to answer your questions or to discuss any ideas that you could have around this. And if any of you want to contact our group, here is my email address at the university is jaume.fatjó@uab.es. Okay, so thanks again for your kind invitation, and well, this is it.
Thank you so much. It was really exciting to get a sneak peek at your research, and also very exciting to hear what you're doing and finding in Barcelona. I'm looking forward to diving into your work a little bit deeper in the Q&A. But next, we have Dr. Henwood. Dr. Henwood is a recognized expert in health and housing services research, whose work connects clinical interventions with social policy. And Dr. Henwood has specific expertise in improving care for adults experiencing homelessness and serious mental illness, as well as in the integration of primary and behavioral health care. His research has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, including the National Institute of Mental Health, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the National Institute on Aging, as well as the National Science Foundation and the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. He has served as the methodological leader for the Greater Los Angeles Homelessness Count since 2017, which is the largest unsheltered count in the United States. And he is a co-author of a book on Housing First, published by Oxford University Press, and is a co-lead of the American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare's Grand Challenges to End Homelessness. And Dr. Henwood is a professor at the University of Southern California School of Social Work and the director of the Center for Housing, Homelessness, and Health Equity Research. So Dr. Henwood, thank you so much for joining us today. Please begin when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. McDonald, for that introduction. And I also want to thank Dr. Fatjó for his presentation. I kind of think in a lot of ways you may have stolen the show here, because I think you really got to some important issues. I'll also be talking about some research we did related to the prevalence of having a pet with an unsheltered population. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of a more straightforward presentation on just establishing like what are those estimates in our unsheltered population. And so this could be a very quick presentation in which I just tell you what we've found over the past few years. However, I think it's pretty important to understand where and how these numbers are being generated. So I just wanted to kind of walk through them before I actually get to the big reveal, so to speak. And this is a paper that's published, so anyone can access this information, and I think we can share a slide. So if you want to just go ahead and move forward, that'd be great. So I just want to frame this issue a little bit in terms of we do have these national estimates, and I know we have an international crowd, so it might actually just kind of be helpful to talk through this. But every year we have a report to Congress that provides estimates for the homeless population. And I think most people kind of intuit that the homeless population has increased over the past decade plus, since we've actually had some relatively good numbers, since the federal government was requiring that these homeless counts happen on a somewhat regular basis every other year. But in fact, we've seen kind of a steady decline, a slow decline that's sort of reversed course in the past couple years, which is concerning. But I think it helps just to set the stage in terms of those numbers. And I didn't update. This is from 2019, so it doesn't have the 2020 numbers. And also to add, in 2021, many of the point in time counts were canceled due to the pandemic. And so while we have a sheltered count, we don't have a total picture. So 2020 is probably the best that we have. And no, this is the overall homeless population. I'll get to some of the unsheltered numbers. Yeah. If you want to advance. I think what's also important is that in the US, homelessness is not an evenly distributed issue, right? So that there are higher and lower concentrations of homelessness in different areas. And you can see the darker blue, again, kind of makes up the more concentrated areas. And of course, the largest homeless population in the country by what we call continuums of care, but basically by place is New York City, whereas California makes up about 25% of the overall homeless population, but close to half of the unsheltered population. So pretty much what happens kind of in California in a lot of ways drives the numbers that are reported each year. So you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So, at our center here, we have a few different research projects. And one of them is to partner with the county to help them with their annual homeless count. And I just wanted to kind of let people see the numbers locally here, these are the numbers we deal with each year. And we became part of the count just in 2017. And so prior to that, it was a lot more community directed or completely community directed without an academic partnership. But as you can see, we've had about an 85% increase in homelessness from the lows over the past 10 years. And our most recent count showed over 66,000 people were experiencing homelessness. And the big difference, again, between like a place like New York, where mostly people are found in the shelter system, is in Los Angeles. To be homeless is mostly to be unsheltered. 3 out of 4 people experience unsheltered homelessness here. So you can go to the next slide. So, very straightforward, what I was hoping just to share with you all, because there are some estimates in the literature in terms of how many people have pets. It's not often broken down between, sheltered versus unsheltered, and even the estimates that we have sometimes are more anecdotal or qualitative in nature. And so we wanted to just, get a sense of the prevalence in using homeless count data. And we also wanted to see to what extent people are reporting it, that it's a barrier, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone here, but just to look at the data on that. So those are our questions, which we're going to answer. But in order to do that, I just want to give you a sense because, and you can go to the next slide, the homeless count is conducted differently in different places. There are some general guidelines that are provided. And in Los Angeles, again, we have the challenge of conducting a very large unsheltered count, which is much different than if you think of a sheltered system where you can kind of pull records and get, how many people were reported to be in those shelters through administrative data. We have 3 different components to the count. We have the shelter count, of course. We have an unsheltered count for adults. And then separately, we have an unsheltered youth count, which we can talk about, but it's a total separate count and methodology that we'll kind of glance over for right now. So if you can move to the next slide. Okay, so the important thing to kind of understand here is it's quite and there may be some people who have been involved in the count. I don't know who's from LA or has participated in this, and this might look similar to other places, but it's largely volunteer driven. So since we were involved in 2017, we've had roughly 8,000 community members come out to do a visual count. Right. So it's a tally where people literally go out with tally sheets. This year was the first year we used an electronic data collection, an app to record the numbers. But people literally go out and count how many people they see on the streets. They also count dwelling types. So if you see a tent or someone living in a car or RV, all of those are counted. And that that provides kind of what we call the raw numbers. But in addition to that, our team of trained surveyors goes out to conduct surveys with people. So that's, we don't ask volunteers to go up and talk to people the night of the count. We actually we have a separate team that does that and to conduct these surveys. So you could go ahead and move to the next slide. And I think I'm seeing someone maybe has participated. So that's great. So again, I kind of went over this, but the goal really is to do a full enumeration. And so we have, over 2,000 census tracts across LA County. I think LA is one of the few places that does it over 3 nights rather than a single night, just because the geography is so vast. But they do have complete coverage, and they make counts in all census tracts to come up with these tallies. And if you move to the next slide, just to give you a sense, and these are the 2019, sorry, I didn't pull in the 2020, but if you think about it cumulatively, the volunteers recorded that they saw 12,665 individuals on the streets over those 3 nights. And then separately, we had counts of over 17,000 units, right? And units being any other makeshift dwelling type where people appear to be living in them, right? So those were counted separately. If you go to the next slide, I'll point out, what that, and I apologize. I think that's my computer making that noise. So sorry about that. I don't know how to turn it off right now. But right, the question is, look, how many people are living in each of those dwelling types? We don't know that because people don't knock on windows or doors or lift up, flaps of tents and look inside. So we want to know how many people are actually living in those dwelling types. And we don't know anything about the characteristics. Like, you can make you could visually decide what people's age and race is, but we try to stay clear of that and do that based on self-report. Okay, so those are kind of the questions. So if you move to the next slide, just to give you a sense of how we get those numbers, right? So we go out, and that's what the survey is for. It provides us two things. It provides us an estimate on average, how many people is living in each of those dwelling types that people counted. And then also we get a sample that tells us, the proportion of men versus, different races or age, as well as pet status. So that's a question that's been there since 2017. And that's what we really focused in on for this report. So if you go to the next slide, just so you understand what, where these data come from, what we end up doing is we and it's not necessarily worth getting into details here, but we do a randomly selected set of census tracts from across the county that are highlighted in red. And then there's a method to how we do it. It's stratified based where there are hot spots where we expect to see people and where we don't. And then we select from those two different groups. And we have trained surveyors that go out and cover, they literally canvass those census tracts. They walk them, they approach people, they knock on cars or, call out to people living in tents. And we do surveys, and we provide small incentives. And, on average, we have over 5,000 usable surveys each year. And I think you can see in 2019, we had about 6,500. And these are all surveyors that are trained here at USC. They often include people with lived experience of homelessness, as well as students, oftentimes social work students that over their winter break, they go out. But we do this over a 3-month period that overlaps the actual point in time count. Okay, so if you had advanced, right. So just to kind of close the loop on this, right? So based on average, we see different numbers of people living in different dwelling types, right? So one person might say, oh, I live in my RV and there are 3 other people in there with me. And someone might say, oh, I live in my tent and it's just me. And right. And so we kind of take the average of those responses, and it's per dwelling type, but just for sake of argument here, we found in 2019 that there was roughly 1.6 people living in each of those dwelling types when you take those averages. And that's how we go from 27,000, the tallies, right, of 17,000 units to estimating how many people were in those units. And that's what then makes up the unsheltered adult count. So hopefully that made sense. I'm happy to talk about that more, but if you want to go to the next slide, that would be great. So, the reason why we're here, the question was, well, in our sample, right, of 6,500 people that we spoke to, what did we see in terms of people identifying that they had a pet companion with them? And we have basically numbers for that across the 3 years at the time that we did this paper. And what you can see in 2017, 2018, 2019, there were roughly 2,800 people in 2017. Fewer in 2018, and then more in 2019. Of course, the numbers themselves increased over this time. So if you look along the axis there, you can see the percentage of the overall unsheltered population that actually was reported having a pet. So 12%, 9%, and then just under 12% in 2019. And I apologize, I don't have the 2020 handy. We can look at that, but I don't have that. And so during the pandemic, we didn't do the count. And actually, just last week was the local pit count here in LA. And so in the next couple months, we'll have information for, post-pandemic or during pandemic responses. The one thing to add is that in 2017, the questions sometimes change year to year. But in 2017, if you said that you did have a companion, a pet companion, you were then asked whether that interfered with you accessing shelter. And in that case, we saw that close to half of the people reported being turned away from a shelter because of their pet policies. And that was either they literally were turned away or they assumed they would be turned away, which I think is an important distinction. But the point being that people felt as if they weren't able to access shelter just because of having a pet. Okay, so you can go to the next slide. So I just want to, kind of leave room for discussion rather than just continue to talk, because it's hard to gauge how people are taking all of this in. But a few points to make. We did see that men were less likely, and those in vehicles were more likely to report having a pet. And so, we can talk about why that might be the case and the extent to which, issues around safety are associated with having a pet. And then we had, if you look at previous reports, which I don't think that there are many, that Cronley and colleagues in 2019, they found about 6% of the unsheltered population had pets, and I forget where their sample was from. I'd have to go back and look at that. So that's lower than what we found. And whereas my colleague Harmony Rhodes, she found that when you looked at the youth homeless population, they reported much higher numbers, around 23%. And that again was with a convenient sample. So just to kind of situate those findings a little bit, I think one takeaway from doing this paper was it would be really interesting to know, again, the youth count is a different methodology. It's a survey-based count. It doesn't have this bifurcated volunteers and then a separate survey team. It's all done together. And so what we did do in 2020 was add a question to the youth count survey to include questions about pets, which were not part of the survey before then. So that is kind of next on our list to look at. And we will have that, we have that for 2020, which we need to look at. We'll have it again when we complete the 2022 count. Right. And so those are the kind of the next, that'll be the first kind of population estimate we have here for the unsheltered youth population. So I think I think that's my last slide. You can go to the next one. Just to confirm. Yeah. Okay. So this is the actual reference. I can drop a link. I think this is open access, but if it's not, and you want to take a look at this paper, just let me know. I'm happy to send you a copy of it. But it kind of basically walks you through those methods and those results. And I think I will, hopefully that's ahead of time and we have time to discuss. So I'll leave it at there. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I'm sure everyone will have a lot of questions. We have about 30 minutes left for the Q&A. So I have jotted down a few questions that people have already posed, but just as a reminder, everyone, if you could please pop your questions into the chat and we'll be monitoring those, and then I can move through them one by one. But I noticed that, is it Danny from PetSmart? You had a question that you posed earlier in the chat about the name of the psychometric tool, and your question was for Dr. Fatjó Ríos.
The name of the psychometric tool, I guess this is the one that we use to profile the human-animal bond. Is that the one? I guess so. Yeah. Thank you. Well, this is actually this is a very interesting question. We used this psychometric tool that is called the MDOS, which stands for the Monash Dog Ownership Relationship Scale. That was developed in Australia a few years ago, and basically through this scale you can profile any relationship between a person and a dog. You can profile that relationship in 3 different dimensions. One is the pattern of interaction, the other one is emotional closeness, and the third one, which is actually a negative one, is the perceived cost. So actually, in all relationships, there is, by definition, is a balance between, let's say, benefits and associated costs. And I'm not talking just about financial costs. I'm talking about, for instance, the impact that the animal will have on your lifestyle. And actually, in our context, well, not having access to a shelter, that would be an associated cost of that particular relationship. So that scale allows you to explore the relationship, from these, according to this multidimensional fashion. So this is a scale that we have used a lot in many different studies, and not just us, other groups as well, and it always works, and it produces actually sound results. I have to say that it was not developed specifically to score, I mean, to look at social support as a concept. And I have to say that now we are involved in a project to actually develop a psychometric tool specifically for measuring the human-animal bond, for measuring social support coming from pets. And actually, we are doing this together with colleagues from the US and the UK. So if you are interested, I mean, if that person from the audience is interested on more details on that, please contact me at anytime.
That's wonderful to hear. Danny, did that answer your question?
It did, thank you. And I absolutely will be reaching out in regard to your new research. It sounds fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to you.
Thank you for your question. And then we had a question for Dr. Henwood as well. Someone asked about, and this may have been answered throughout the presentation, so I'm sorry if it was, is this unsheltered homelessness or the HUD definition of effective homelessness? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that may have been a question about the initial estimates, and that included from across the country. That was both the sheltered and unsheltered. I just gave overall numbers, at which that was true of the LA numbers too. And I didn't break it out other than to say that 3/4 of those individuals were unsheltered. So it's closer to 40,000 unsheltered individuals in LA.
Thank you for clarifying. And there was another question from Marisa, apologies if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. How are ethical aspects taken into account? Let's see, how are ethical aspects in such countings taken into account? Apologies, that was a question for Dr. Henwood as well.
Yeah, I wonder if who said that? Marissa, if you want to just add to that a little bit. I don't know if you mean in terms of just respecting people's privacy or the count or that sort of thing. I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. Our surveyors, we actually go through some trauma-informed training around interviewing, and we try to pair up students with people with lived experience. And clearly, if anyone doesn't want to engage, they don't have to. And we do provide resources. Our survey teams go out and actually, like companies like Bombas socks that maybe people are familiar with have donated thousands of pairs of socks that we distribute, and we do have information on resources. But but our surveys are just there to do surveys. They're not outreach workers, and it's just a annual data collection effort that we do. So I don't know, but happy to talk more about that.
Thanks so much. Did that answer your question? And we have another question for Dr. Fatjó. What has the government reception been so far? Is Barcelona more liberal or conservative in their policies? Trish is asking because their local government has a conservative neoliberal I think that's that might be a typo, neoliberal perspective, and likely wouldn't be very receptive to this idea unless it benefited them financially somehow.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Well, I will say that in general, over the last 10 years, we have had a very liberal government. I mean, the local government is very liberal, and so they are very open to in general, they are very open to public policies to support, you know, in our case, people experiencing homelessness, and they are very open to sort of to revisit even ideas like, well, defining what is a family and defining what should be considered a family, or expanding our ideas about what a family should be. In the central government now, so if we talk about Spain, actually now is the same. Well, it's not the same party, but there is a coalition. So it's again, it's less liberal. I will say it's a little bit more conservative because that's part of a coalition. But I think that they are still quite open to this kind of approach. Having said that, I don't know how long that will last in these days, so I'm not particularly optimistic, but I will say that for the time being, yes, they are quite liberal.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And Vicky, do you mind if I unmute you, Vicky? Would you be willing to ask your question directly? Or am I able to do that, Dana? I apologize. Seems like
yes, I can unmute her for you if she would like to ask it in person. Just give me 1 second.
Am I unmuted?
you are. Thank you.
Hi, Shelby. This is Vicki Diesner, your co-author from a couple of years ago on that DV report we did article. What I was wondering is actually, I thought I heard yesterday in a presentation that whether it's LA City or county or the whole state, if any shelters receive public funding, they can't refuse animals. So my question was, with that map that was put up by Benjamin Henwood, and he showed, you know, and he mentioned that like 48% were turned away. So my question is, I just would assume that most of the shelters throughout California receive some public funding. So maybe that isn't true. Maybe half are private. And so I just wondered for a little bit more information on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm happy to respond and also just acknowledge that I don't know that there's a requirement that people, you may be right about that. I wasn't familiar that shelters that receive public funds have to accept pets. I know that there have been a lot of advocating for that, but I actually don't know where we stand today. The data that we were showing was from 2017 when that question was asked. So, you know, it could be a bit dated. But I think also to your point, you know, when we get the sheltered count each year, there are a lot that are sort of official shelters that are report into the homeless management information system, but there are a lot of shelters that do not. They may be, you know, located in the basement of a church or a community that likely isn't considered publicly funded. And so, right. And so if that is true, they wouldn't have to abide by that.
Okay,
but
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Or the other thing is maybe I misunderstood and maybe that bill hasn't even passed yet. Maybe it's in a bill. So sorry, but thank you for the clarification. You can go, I will unmute myself.
Thank you so much. And next we have a question from Brittany. And Dana, do you mind unmuting Brittany?
Sure, I will ask her.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Dr. Henwood, I was wondering whether you had a sense of how prevalent or not pet questions have been in the ongoing point in time counts and surveys that are happening currently in California?
Yeah, it's a great question, and honestly, I don't. You know, we do sometimes have conversations with other COCs in terms of their methods, but in full transparency, the issue around pets is not something that has ever come up in those conversations. So I don't, you know, and this was information that was there for some time, but actually hadn't been reported on, which is why we wrote the paper. So it may be that those questions are there, but I haven't seen a lot reported out on it. So it's a good question to look into.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks so much. And Daniel, Daniel says, I'm thinking mostly of LA, but maybe this is also applicable to Barcelona as well. Is there also risk or fear of people being separated from their pets during encampment clearings and or other forms of urban policing? Much of the focus is fear of separation due to shelters, but I wonder if the criminal justice system can be considered another institution which produces marginalization among homeless persons afraid of separation from their companion animals as well. What an interesting question. And Daniel, was that to anyone specific?
Yeah, I'm thinking about. I don't know if you want to go first, Ben, or
No, I need to reread the question. So yeah, go.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was yeah. Is that?
We can also unmute Daniel.
Oh yeah.
Perhaps. Thank you, Dana.
Yeah, just questioning, wondering, you know, a lot of the focus is on how shelters, there's a lot of people will not access shelters in order to protect their bonds with their animals, but also, you know, fear of various forms of policing, wondering if that also makes them move to more out of the way places of the city, make them even harder to reach from outreach. You know, I'm from New York, so there's a lot of outreach going on where social workers are allied sort of with policing, going into the subways and that kind of thing. So thinking if that sort of relationship with policing and the criminal justice system might contribute more to marginalization and that kind of hesitancy as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I fully agree with that. I mean, and this is as I said. Well, if you think about the at least in the case of Barcelona, both the local authorities, social services, and the Fatjó Foundation, they are. I mean, we started with this in terms of the study. We started with that particular population because we thought, well, these are the ones probably who are experiencing most problems, and they are facing a more difficult situation. But now at this very moment, we are already collecting data from exactly the kind of profile that you were describing, people who are probably sheltered, or probably they feel that the bond that they have with their pets is somehow attacked, or it could be at stake because of interventions on the places that they live, or the places that where they have some sort of access to. So I fully agree with you. I don't know what's your view, Ben, because I don't know the situation in the US, but at least in Barcelona, I see that can be expanded to many other people facing difficulties at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have much to add other than to just echo, right? These are not necessarily user-friendly designs, you know, the service system, and there's often little thought of accommodation and preference when it comes to pets or other, you know, perceived obstacles. And so, right, I think your point's well taken.
Thank you so much for answering that. Really interesting discussion. I had a quick question for Dr. Henwood. You said that men were less likely. Was that to have dogs?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And I was just curious, that phrasing suggests that maybe only one gender identity was measured. Is that true? More or less likely than who? And it just seems like if it is just one other category, what a major limitation for the homeless population, considering the overrepresentation of LGBTQ folks.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the sort of the other categories were kind of collapsed because there weren't enough respondents who identified as something other than male or female to separately do that analysis. So it was kind of men versus not women, but
binary sex. Gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then, Brittany may have somewhat gotten to this already, but Brittany and I are actually on the same committee together, which is the Housing Policy Committee at the ASPCA. And if I were to take a few things back from each of your talks, what would you want me to share with this committee that's composed of people from government relations, who are doing policy work across the US?
Is that a question for me since I'm US based, or?
Oh, it's for both of you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to just point out, two quick things. Like, again, obviously it's hard to design a system if you don't have information about the needs and preferences of those you're trying to accommodate. So, the fact that there is very little information on sort of the pet prevalence is, I think, just a shortcoming in terms of making informed decisions. I think the other point that I kind of referenced was, the issue of whether it's a barrier is both, and I wanted to thank Catherine, who actually put in the information about what's on the books. But I think that there's a question about like what the law is, how it is implemented, and then how it is perceived. So, we had people that assumed they want to be able to access a shelter. And maybe they would have been able to. And so, part of it is not just changing the policy, but then it's like, how do you provide and disseminate that information and engage people so that they now are made aware of that? So I think that's an issue that, needs to be addressed, that doesn't just flip a switch and, you take away those barriers. So those are my two thoughts. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Well, and if I had to say, if I had to pick up one idea, I will say that because this is, I think, a common feature of many discussions that you can have, because I have faced this situation before, not just in the context of people experiencing homelessness, also in the context of people experiencing grief because they have lost a companion animal. And I think that in many situations when you see a confrontational attitude about that, or when you see someone saying, well, but we cannot actually invest effort on this. And then sometimes the problem is at the beginning of the discussion. And sometimes I see, well, before we get into the discussion, I just have a question for you, which is, do you think that the human-animal bond is important and is valuable? And most of the time, when you see these very oppositional attitudes, the answer for that question is no. So at the bottom or at the bottom of the underlying problem, or the underlying point of disagreement, is that they don't value that particular bond. They say, well, that's not crucial, that's not important. Yes, it's something that is, sometimes they perceive that as an accessory thing. And from the point of view of trying to move a public policy, if we don't start by agreeing on the value of that particular bond, then nothing will happen. So you have to spend, so that's probably one question that will help you to drive the discussion and to avoid, being going in circles around the idea. That's what I will say.
Wonderful, thanks so much. Brittany, any follow-ups to that?
So both of those responses were incredibly helpful. I think in the ASPCA's experience, in California in particular, something we're seeing is that light switch go off for lawmakers when you do ask them, what would you do if you had to be separated from your pet? Do you have an understanding of that bond? And that is when they realize that we've had these gaps in our decision making and how to tackle the issue. So I think that's where awareness is increasing. So it's incredibly encouraging to have data to back it up, making that emotional connection and then having the data to back it up. So a huge thank you to you both.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you so much. And have I missed any questions? Dana, I know you've been tracking them as well.
I have not seen any others come through. I had to pull away to double check the timing for the agenda. But comments, I haven't seen any additional questions per se.
Okay. Well, if anyone feels that their question has been missed, please feel free to let me know via the chat. How about our speakers? Are there any questions you have for the audience?
No,
Well, yes, I had one actually for you, because I mean, I am familiar with part of the literature, but I mean, having the opportunity to talk to you directly is, do you have and I think that I already got the answer, that I was wondering if you have the same feeling in the US, that sometimes the human-animal bond is not valued, or some people underestimate the value of dogs for anyone in terms of the social support that they could get. And that was, I mean, I think that you have already sort of answered that question, but that was probably I was really curious about that. Yeah. So I think that you were, I mean, when I was saying that you were saying, yeah, right. Yeah, you got it. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
Well, in some ways, I think Brittany spoke to it maybe most directly, that I can't tell that people undervalue it, or they just don't make the connection as sort of policy relevant issue, even if they personally understand it quite well. I mean, there may be a gap there too for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. And Dr. Henwood, anything?
No, I was just surprised that there was, such a large turnout to go over numbers. So that's great to see.
True to the human-animal bond, my dog, if you can hear this, is letting me know that it's getting close to dinner time. That is the noise in the background, and I apologize. Let's see. Well, I don't see any other additional questions in the chat. So Dana, if it's okay with you, should we go ahead and wrap up?
Yep, break time is 4 o'clock to 4:15. So you can head on to the main room if you'd like to see a revolving slide deck, or head on out to break and just be back by 4:15 for another storytelling session.
Thank you for your wonderful presentations. It's nice to see everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.